So for those of you who don't know what the hell is going on right now, basically we are taking four subjects about the Reconstruction era, the social, political, economic, and technological subjects, and we did case studies on them and studied info and figured out if they positively affected African Americans after the abolishment of slavery or negatively affect them. So, and basically, we're going to study each of these four subjects and give them grades from A through F. So, just like school. So, our thesis statement is the Reconstruction era solved the problems of slavery and created a more equal union as identified in our study. So, basically, we think that the Reconstruction era did, in fact, solve the problems of slavery after slavery was abolished and created a more equal union. So we're going to divide this into four separate groups, obviously covering the four different subjects of the report card. So here we go. Here's number one. Number one, social. Despite earning freedom, many stereotypes were created towards African Americans. African Americans were still being looked down upon and treated poorly. Many scuffles between African Americans and whites seemed to be frequent. When African Americans would create their own community, questions were created. White Americans would think questions such as, where does the money come from? Or how do they learn and get education? Despite having jobs of pay, African Americans never had jobs that would pay more than a white American. So there was a bunch of unfairness going on. Affordability was a problem with African Americans. African Americans tended to have a problem paying taxes. Many were upheld for this. African Americans would pay for housing, food, and mostly education too. Because of this, controversy was created when all black schools were being created by the Jim Crow laws. So we gave the social part of this project a grade of a C minus because, I mean, even though African Americans were free, they were still getting treated pretty poorly by whites. Groups were created like the KKK who attacked them and threatened them, and the Jim Crow laws didn't help, as you will see in the next subject about the political. But yeah, they're still being discriminated against, and but it's not like a D or an F because, I mean, it's better than slavery. So for that, we give them a C minus. Number two, politics. So right before the Civil War ended, this thing called the 13th Amendment was passed, basically abolishing all slavery in the United States of America. Soon after that, the 14th and 15th Amendment passed, giving blacks citizenship and the right to vote. Well, after the Civil War ended, once Northern troops left the South, former Confederate soldiers took up office and implemented methods to stop African Americans from having their full rights, aka having the right to vote. Poll taxes were made, so to vote you had to pay money, and literacy tests, which basically are unfair tests, were made, so to be able to vote you have to pass the test. Things like Jim Crow laws segregated African Americans. For example, they couldn't use water fountains in bathrooms that would say whites only because, I mean, obviously only white people could use those. And that forced them into the colored section, which didn't have as good as toilets or bathrooms, and etc. There's also this President Grant, who was pretty weak. His presidency was plagued by corruption and scandals, and this pretty much tarnished his reputation and weakened his power. We gave the political portion of this project a C minus because the amendments didn't really help solve the problem of segregation. They actually more or less supported it with the Jim Crow laws, and the amendment did give them freedom, however, but and quote unquote the same rights, but did not change the fact that they were still discriminated against, and there were made literacy tests that really took away their right to vote, even though it's true that they can vote, but they have to pass these unfair literacy tests that are literally impossible to pass. But yeah, that's why we gave it a C minus. Number three, economics. So the Civil War, in a way, redrew the economic map for the United States. I mean, as we can see before the Civil War, the North had most of the wealthy states, but some states in the South were still pretty wealthy due to slavery and how slavery really helped the economy of the farmers down low in the South. But as you can see, after the Civil War, slavery was abolished, therefore it massively damaged the South's economy, but raised the North's economy. So for the economic portion of this project, we decided to give it a flat C because although the economy for the North boomed, the South was also in ruin. So I think those don't really cancel each other out in the sense that the North being being rich basically and the South being poor kind of outweighs one another. I think they both kind of cancel each other out in a sense. So I think that's why they made dead in the center and flat. So that's why we gave it a C. Number four, technology. So technology seems to be the only really good positive thing about the Reconstruction era and post-Civil War. New kinds of weapons and technology were created for the Civil War. New muskets that would shoot with farther range. This thing called the repeating rifle was also created, which could shoot 7 shots in 30 seconds, which was absolutely insane, considering, you know, you had to with a regular musket, shoot and then take forever to reload. So yeah, that kind of sucks. But also other war vehicles were also created for the Civil War. Uh, there were submarines that were created that were 40 feet long and 4 feet across, with a metal tube that would hold up to 8 troops for aquatic warfare. And Civil War was the first war to be documented with a camera as well. The Union used railroads and telegraphs, which helped them turn the tide of the war. And the railroads would transfer troops and supplies in fast speeds, and telegraphs made communicating easier and quicker. So last but not least, the technology portion of this report card. So we gave technology a grade of an A, and just a flat A, because new weapons were created for the war, and new ways of transportation, espionage, and attacking strategies were made, and a new way of communication and media were also created. These new technological advancements would pave the way for many more advancements in the weapons for the 20th century, and I don't think there's really any negatives for the technology, as both sides were creating and innovating new technology, and I think that really helped us pave the way for new technology in the future that we have today.